Hello, everybody. Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Sorry, I took an extra second there. Had to do a little housekeeping. Joe in the Inland Empire, Bella in Florida, Guy in Ohio, Joseph at work, Belle in Texas, I'm Yisrael Chai, Gordo in Scotland, Yehudit in South Carolina, Bill in mid-Missouri, Karen in Northern California, Shandor in the Bronx, Sharon in New Jersey, Chaim in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Camille in Texas, and Israel. Welcome, everybody. We're moving into chapter 3 of Tractate Horayos. Our daf is page 10. We're picking up at the very bottom of page 9b with Mishnah number 1 in chapter 3. And we've got a very colorful page today with a couple of famous sugyas, famous sayings, let's say, of the Talmud. And some fascinating biblical stories with moral dilemma. This is good stuff. Good stuff coming up. 9b at the bottom, Mishnah number 1 in chapter 3. In the case of an anointed priest who sinned on the basis of his own erroneous halachic ruling, a legal ruling, and thereafter he moved on from his anointment. Very interesting way to say a retired high priest. For example, if he was disqualified due to a blemish that befell him before he brought his sin offering, right? So he made a mistaken ruling and relied on that ruling. So this is what would qualify him to bring the bull, right? The bull for the unwitting transgression based on an erroneous ruling that a high priest brings. So he committed that action, the erroneous ruling and the sin, the unwitting sin because he relied on his own erroneous ruling. Then he was brought out of the priesthood, in this case because of a blemish. He's no longer the high priest. And he hasn't had his chance to bring a sin offering yet. So, when he committed the action, he was the high priest. Then he had to step down from being the high priest. What offering does he bring? Does he bring the sin offering of a commoner, or does he still bring the special bull offering of the high priest? Right, that's the question. And likewise, in the case of a king, in this case, a nasi, right, which is a word for prince, like the leader of a tribe, but who can also, this word can refer to the king of the nation, who sinned and thereafter moved on from his prominence before he had brought an offering. So the anointed priest brings a bull, despite the fact that he is no longer the high priest. And the king brings a goat, as he would have done during his reign. Now, in the case of an anointed priest who moved on from his anointment, and then he committed the sin, and likewise the king who moved on from his prominence and thereafter committed the sin. So the anointed priest still brings a bull. Sounds like an ex-high priest still has the special offering of a high priest, but the status of the king is like that of a commoner, right? A king who has lost the throne or left the throne, or for whatever reason is not serving as the king, is treated like a commoner in terms of bringing an offering, the offering of a commoner for his unwitting sin. Okay, that's Mishnah 1 in chapter 3. Now the Gemara. The Gemara questions the formulation of the Mishnah. Now it can be said an anointed priest who moved on from his anointment and thereafter sinned brings a bull. But does the case of one who sinned and thereafter moved on from his anointment need to be said? It is obvious that he is liable to bring a bull. And the Gemara answers, well, due to the fact that the Tana of our Mishnah teaches the law with regard to a king, that when he moved on from his sovereignty and thereafter sinned, he brings an offering like that of a commoner. Therefore, he teaches the corresponding law with regard to an anointed priest, that if he sinned and thereafter moved on from his priesthood, he still brings the bull for the sin that he committed while he was the high priest. With regard to the statement in the Mishnah concerning an anointed priest who sinned after he was removed from his position, the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? Isn't it surprising that the ex-high priest still brings the offering of a high priest, even if he sinned after he left the position of high priest? So the Gemara answers, it is, as the sages taught, it is written with regard to the high priest, and he shall sacrifice for his sin, chatato, that he sinned. This is Leviticus 4:3. And from this exact formulation, this teaches that he brings his sin offering, chatato, right, or chataso, after he has moved on from his priesthood. Nevertheless, his obligations remain the same. And this derivation is necessary. As one might have thought, could this not be derived through a kal v'chomer inference? And if a king who brings a goat as his sin offering for the unwitting performance of an action does not bring a goat as his sin offering from the moment that he has moved on from his sovereignty, an anointed priest who does not bring a sin offering for the unwitting performance of an action alone, rather he is liable only for the absence of awareness of the matter by the court together with unwitting performance of an action, is it not all the more so that he will not bring a bull for his sin offering once he has moved on from the high priesthood? Therefore, the verse states, and he shall sacrifice for his sin, chataso, that he sinned. This teaches that he brings his sin offering, right? Sin offering, chatas. His sin offering, chataso, even after he has moved on from his priesthood. And the Gemara asks, well, then let a king who is no longer king also bring a goat as a sin offering based on the reverse kal v'chomer inference. And if an anointed priest who does not bring an offering for the unwitting performance of an action in the absence of a ruling that he was relying on, brings a sin offering after he has moved on from the priesthood, then with regard to a king who brings a sin offering for the unwitting performance of an action, is it not logical that he still brings his sin offering once he has moved on from his sovereignty? And to counter this, the verse states, when a king sins, in Leviticus 4:22, from which it is derived, if he sins when he is king, yes, he brings his sin offering. If he sins when he is a commoner, no, he does not bring his sin offering. And we don't make the same extension that we did for the high priest, because the language of the sin of the high priest has that extra reference to his sin, indicating that he retains that status with respect to his sins even after he has left being the high priest. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 3. Short Mishnah and discussion. Now, Mishnah 2, quite a bit longer discussion. If a king or high priest sinned before they were appointed, right? So we've discussed if he sinned while he was appointed, but he didn't bring the offering until after he left office. And then we discussed if he sinned after he left office. Here now in Mishnah 2, we're going to talk about if he commits his sin before he became king or before he became high priest. If a king or a high priest sinned before they were appointed and thereafter they were appointed, the status of these people is like that of commoners. They bring the sin offering of an individual. They committed the sin while they were a commoner, but then they were elevated and they have not yet brought the offering. So the question is, which offering do they bring? Sounds like they don't bring the offering of a high priest or a king, because the sin that they committed when they committed it, they were not the high priest or the king. Rabbi Shimon says if it became known to them before they were appointed as king or high priest that they sinned, they're liable to bring the sin offering of an individual. But if it became known to them after they were appointed, they didn't know they committed the sin. It was an unwitting transgression after all. And if they only found out that they committed such a sin after they assumed the high office, then they are completely exempt. Not they bring the offering of a high priest or a king, but rather they don't bring any offering because they didn't bring the offering of an individual when they were qualified to bring the offering of an individual. Once they were king, they can't bring the offering of a king for the sin committed by a private individual, so they don't qualify for the atonement of the individual nor of a king or high priest. That's why they're exempt. They don't get that opportunity to make atonement through the sin offering. Who is the Nasi? This is a king. As it is stated, when a Nasi sins and performs any one of all the commandments of the Lord his God that shall not be performed unwittingly, and he is guilty, in Leviticus 4:22, referring to one who has only the Lord his God over him and no other authority. And this is only the king. Once, Israel had kings. We didn't have kings for the first 400 years after Joshua led the children of Israel into the land of Israel, before Saul became the first king. The Gemara on this Mishnah number 2. The Mishnah teaches, if a king or high priest sinned before they were appointed and thereafter they were appointed, the status of these people is like that of commoners. And the Gemara asks from where these matters derived. And the Gemara answers, it is as the sages taught with regard to the verse, quote, if the anointed priest shall sin to bring guilt, in Leviticus 4:3. And this serves to exclude the unwitting transgressions that he performed prior to his installation as high priest. As one might have thought, could this not be derived through a kal v'chomer inference? And if a king who brings a goat as his sin offering for the unwitting performance of an action does not bring a sin offering for the unwitting transgressions that he performed prior to his coronation, then with regard to an anointed priest who brings his sin offering only when he relies on a ruling that was mistaken, so the absence of awareness of the matter, combined with the unwitting performance of an action based on that ruling, so is it not logical that he will not bring his sin offering for the prior transgressions? And the Gemara rejects this analysis and says, no. If you said this with regard to a king, that is reasonable, as he does not bring his goat for a sin offering once he has moved on from his sovereignty, and instead brings the sin offering of a commoner. Shall you also say this with regard to an anointed priest who continues to bring a bull for his sin offering even once he has moved on from his priesthood? Since he brings a bull for a sin offering even once he has moved on from his priesthood, perhaps he shall bring a bull as a sin offering for the unwitting transgressions that he performed prior to his installation as high priest. And therefore the verse states, if the anointed priest shall sin, from which it is derived, if he sins when he is serving as an anointed priest, he brings a bull as his sin offering. If he sins when he is an ordinary priest, he does not bring a bull as his sin offering. So you might say, well, what about when he's no longer high priest? Is he an ordinary priest? No, he is not. He is a former high priest, special designation. Interesting that an ex-king is a commoner. An ex-high priest is an ex-high priest. And it is also taught in this way in a baraisa with regard to a king. When a king sins, this serves to exclude the unwitting transgressions that he performed prior to his coronation as king. As one might have thought, could this not be derived through a kal v'chomer inference if an anointed priest who brings a bull for his sin offering even once he has moved on from his priesthood does not bring his sin offering for the unwitting transgressions that he performed prior to his installation, then with regard to a king who does not bring his goat for a sin offering once he has moved on from his sovereignty, is it not logical that he will not bring his sin offering for his prior transgressions? Apparently, there is no need for the derivation from the verse. The kal v'chomer would stand, it works. Why do we also need a derivation from a verse? And the Gemara notes that this inference could be rejected. We can't rely on the kal v'chomer. What is notable about an anointed priest? He is notable in that he does not bring a sin offering for the unwitting performance of an action unless it was performed on the basis of an erroneous ruling. Shall you say the same with regard to a king who brings an offering for the unwitting performance of an action alone, even without reliance on an erroneous ruling? If he simply commits an unwitting transgression, he brings a special offering of a king. He doesn't have to rely on a ruling in order to bring that special offering of a king like an anointed priest does. Since he brings an offering for the unwitting performance of an action alone, shall he bring a bull as a sin offering for the unwitting transgression he performed prior to his coronation? Therefore, the verse states, when a king sins, from which it is derived, in a case where he sins and he is king, he brings a bull as his sin offering, and not in a case where he sins and he is still a commoner. Bull? I think that's a misprint, since the king doesn't bring a bull. The king brings a goat. And it's not in the bold type, which indicates what's actually written in the Gemara. It's in the non-bold type, which is the elucidation. What can I say? Occasionally, a misprint gets into the text here in this English elucidation of the Gemara. The Gemara analyzes the Baraisa. The master said one might have thought that this is a decree. And the Gemara asks, a decree? From where would this be derived? Why should it enter one's mind that there would be a decree that the king must sin? What? What are we talking about here? The sages say, yes, there is a basis for that understanding, as we find that type of interpretation elsewhere. Let's go back. Yeah, I skipped something here. Okay. Apropos a king. The verse states, let's go back. Therefore, the verse states, when a king sins, from which it is derived, in a case where he sins and he is king, he brings a bull as a sin offering, which I think is a misprint, and not in a case where he sins and he is still a commoner. Okay, new subject. Apropos a king. The sages taught, in contrast to other cases where the verse states, if he will sin, the Torah says concerning a king, when a king sins. When. Interesting, the word here is asher. Sometimes it's translated as that. Sometimes it's translated as happy. But usually it's a connecting verb. But here it's used in a meaning of when. Right? It's translated as when a king sins, right? That the king sins, meaning when the king sins. So one might have thought that this is a decree, meaning that it is a given that the king will sin, right? It's not if a king sins, because sooner or later the king is going to sin because he's a human, right? So it's predicting that he will sin. But what the sages are not going to ask is, well, is it just predicting that he'll sin because he's human? Or is there some kind of an inference or implication or nuance of this verse that a king is supposed to sin, right? That he's somehow fulfilling his role by committing a sin. And then, of course, what? The whole idea of sin is don't do it. Right? So why would this imply not only that, well, invariably he is going to do it, sad but true, but somehow that he should do it? That's what's so strange and interesting here. One might have thought that this is a decree, i.e. that it is a given that the king will sin. Therefore, the verse states, if the anointed priest shall sin, if, just as there the meaning is in the event that the priest shall sin, so too here, with regard to a king, it means in the event that the king shall sin. And the Gemara analyzes the Baraisa. The master said, one might have thought that this is a decree, a gezerah. Now, normally when we say decree, what do we mean? We mean that the sages created a law, right, in order to protect us from coming to violate explicitly written laws in the Torah, right? And so, it's a gezerah that after we light the Shabbos lamps, we don't move them, right? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that you can't move a Shabbos light. Why do we refrain from moving it? Because we might come to extinguish it or shorten its life, because in the old days it was oil lamps, and moving it could end up using more of the oil or spill some of the oil or create other problems that would shorten the time that it burned, and so we don't touch the light. That's a gezerah. It's a decree of the sages to protect us from coming to extinguish a light on Shabbos. Okay. The master said, one might have thought that this is a decree, a gezerah. And so now the Gemara asks, a gezerah? From where would this be derived? Why would it enter one's mind that there would be a decree that the king must sin, that the king must sin? Not just a prediction, he's human, it's inevitable, he's going to commit a sin, and this is how we deal with it, but rather that the king must sin. Why in the world would we think that the Torah is implying this, or that the sages issued such a decree based on this verse? And the sages say, yes, there is a basis for this understanding, as we find that type of interpretation elsewhere, as it is written, when you come into the land of Canaan, which I give to you for a possession, and I shall place the mark of tzaras in a house of the land of your possession, in Leviticus 14:34. So these are tidings informing them, i.e. the Jewish people, that these marks of tzaras will come upon them when they enter Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, right? So it will happen that when you're living in the land, from time to time, these marks of tzaras will appear in a home, right? And then if it truly is tzaras, and the quarantine of the Kohen is not effective in stopping it, they're going to have to tear down that house, right? Now, Rabbi Shimon says this verse serves to teach that tzaras causes ritual impurity only when its origins are divine, to the exclusion of tzaras that results from circumstances beyond one's control, i.e. those that have a clear physical cause. So didn't Rabbi Yehuda say that tzaras could be tidings, i.e. that there will definitely be tzaras? Here too, with regard to the king, say that it is a decree, presumably from heaven, that he will sin. Therefore it is written, if the anointed priest shall sin, meaning that the sin is not a given. Right? With respect to the priest, it says if. With respect to the king, it says when. Now, does that mean that heaven has decreed that a king will sin? Like has it removed his free will? Has he been ordered to sin? Is it just so inevitable that we're understanding it this way? What's going on? So the Gemara asks with regard to this baraisa, and according to Rabbi Shimon, do marks of tzuras that result from circumstances beyond one's control not cause tuma, ritual impurity? But isn't it taught in a baraisa, when a person shall have in the skin of his flesh a wool white, right, the color of white of wool of a sheep, right, a wool white mark of tzuras, or a scab, this is Leviticus 13:2, that these laws apply from this statement onward, i.e. from the time that God gave this commandment to the Jewish people, and these laws do not apply to tzuras that preceded the giving of the mitzvah. Right? At the time that God said to Moses, command the Jewish people that this is what you will do when tzuras appears. Well, if somebody had a mark of tzuras before that law was given, was it tzuras? Or was it not tzuras? Was it just some, physical blemish that maybe comes and goes, but is not to be treated and understood and dealt with through the procedures of tzuras? Now remember, tzuras, the way it exists in the Torah and in Jewish history, and it no longer exists, it was not a disease. It wasn't like eczema. It wasn't like psoriasis. It was a blotch on the skin, but it's one that resulted as a physical expression of a spiritual malady. What was the spiritual malady? Our sages most often say it resulted from lashon hara, evil speech, gossip, slander, using one's faculty of speech in an inappropriate manner. And there was a purification process for it, and once the temple was destroyed, tzuras went out of the Jewish experience. We no longer have tzuras. It was a mark of a higher spiritual level that we would be warned and told and then struck with tzuras for not conducting ourselves appropriately with respect to our speech. Once the level of the nation came down from that, we no longer merited to have the temple in our midst. We also no longer merited to have the problem, all right, or the opportunity, the atonement opportunity of tzuras in our midst. And could this idea that any of these blemishes that look like tzuras but appeared before tzuras was given to the people, the commandment regarding it, and could this not be derived through logical inference? The Torah deemed one impure in the case of a zav, a man who has a certain kind of emission, and the Torah deemed one impure in the case of marks of tzuras, just as a zav is ritually impure, is tameh, only from the statement, once this law was given, onward. So too, with regard to marks of tzuras, there is impurity, there is tuma, only from the time that statement, that law was given. And there is no need for a derivation about that fact from the verse in Leviticus. So the Brisa continues, this inference can be rejected. No, if you said that with regard to a zav, this is reasonable, as he does not become impure if his condition was not caused by circumstances beyond his control. Shall you say the same with regard to marks of tzuras, which impart tuma when caused by circumstances beyond one's control? Therefore, the verse states, when a person shall have, indicating that there is tuma only from that statement onward. In any case, it is clear that tzuras causes impurity, even if it was caused by circumstances beyond his control. And Rava says in explanation, the phrase, I shall place the mark of tzuras, serves to exclude marks of tzuras caused by evil spirits. Rav Papa says in explanation, that phrase serves to exclude marks of tzuras that were caused by sorcery, right? There could have been other reasons that the tzuras would appear. Whether it was because of your misconduct or some external force caused it, and then how are you going to deal with that? That's a subject for another day. Remember that this little discussion was brought incidental to the question of when a king shall sin. Is it inevitable that kings will sin? Will every king sin? Has he been somehow ordered to sin? We still haven't dealt with that question. Apropos a king, the sages taught that when the verse states, when a king sins, in Leviticus 4:22, this serves to exclude a king who is ill. And the Gemara asks, due to the fact that he is ill, is he removed from his sovereignty? It's not that he won't sin, right? A person who's sick can still sin. It's that if he is ill, he's not king. What do you mean he's not king? We don't say that just because he's got a cold, he's not the king. What are you talking about? Rav Abdimi Bar Chama said the reference is not to all illnesses. Rather, it is to exclude a king who is afflicted with tsaras, as it is stated concerning King Azariah. And the Lord afflicted the king so that he was a mitzvah until the day of his death and dwelt in an independent house. And Jotham, the son of the king, was over the household, judging the people of the land. That's 2 Kings 15:5. So Azariah was removed from his sovereignty when he was afflicted with tsaras. Right? When you get this tsaras that won't go away, then, because most tsaras goes away. You go through the period of quarantine, you do your tshuva, you go through your purification, then you rejoin the camp. But while you're a mitzvah, you have to keep a distance from all the people. A king who's in that state can't be running the country. And since Azariah, God struck him with, you'll be a mitzvah till the day you die, he was removed from his sovereignty and his son had to rule in his stead. The Gemara comments from the fact that the verse states, in an independent house, by inference, it may be understood that until now he was a servant, i.e., he was in servitude to the people. And the Gemara notes, this is similar to that incident where Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua were traveling together on a ship. And Rabban Gamliel had sufficient bread for the journey. Rabbi Yehoshua also had sufficient bread. And additionally, he had flour. The journey lasted longer than expected, and Rabban Gamliel's bread was finished. So he relied on Rabbi Yehoshua's flour for nourishment. Rabbi Gamliel said to Rabbi Yehoshua, did you know from the outset that we would have so substantial a delay? Is that the reason that you brought flour with you? And Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabban Gamliel, there is one star that rises once in 70 years and misleads sailors at sea, causing their journeys to be extended. And I said, perhaps that star will rise during our journey and mislead us. And Rabban Gamliel said to him, so much wisdom is at your disposal, and you board a ship to earn your livelihood. And Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, before you wonder about me, wonder about two students that you have on dry land, Rabbi Elazar Chizma and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Gudgeda, who are so wise that they know how to calculate how many drops of water there are in the sea. And yet, they have neither bread to eat nor a garment to wear. And Rabban Gamliel made up his mind to seat them at the head of the academy. And when Rabban Gamliel ascended to dry land, he sent a messenger to them to tell them to come so that he could appoint them, and they did not come. And he again sent a messenger to them, and they came. And Rabban Gamliel said to them, do you imagine that I am granting you authority? And since you did not want to accept the honor, you did not want to come when I sent for you. I am granting you servitude, as it is stated, and they spoke to him, saying, if you will be a servant to this people today. And this explains the phrase, an independent house. Oh, let's unpack a few things there. First of all, they didn't want to come because they were so humble that they didn't want to accept some kind of an honor. And he said to them, when you're elevated above your peers to join us as the sages, right? And to have a place of honor at the head of the academy, that's not an honor. That's a place of servitude, right? From those to whom much is given, much is expected, right? So if you're going to come to one of these these benches at the front and basically become a judge over Israel, right? Join the Sanhedrin or join those who issue rulings over the land. That doesn't mean you're going to sit back and have boat drinks and sunsets, right? That means that now you're going to have to work that much harder in order to issue proper and just rulings, and you are a servant of the people. All politicians will say they are servants of the people. How many of them do really take that responsibility seriously and in this manner that's intended? Second, right? It's such a beautiful story that Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua were on this ship, right? And it was Rabbi Yehoshua who was prepared for the eventuality that instead of their journey lasting, 2 weeks, that it lasted 2 months because they got lost at sea. And he brought not only bread for the 2-week trip, but flour just in case. And thank God he had it so that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua were able to feed themselves for the whole trip. And when he was asked, why did you think that could happen? He said, because there's a star that rises once every 70 years and it misleads the sailors. And do you know what that star was? It's not for sure, but there's a note here from Rav Steinsaltz that this refers to Halley's Comet, which passes once every 76 years. And if that is indeed what was intended and what was meant by this, then this is the first mention of Halley's Comet in world literature. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. But this idea that, listen, you never know. Strange things could happen, right? The sailors could be misjudged and, make a mistake of navigation. Why? Because of a star that comes every 70 or, every 76 years? Okay. More important, perhaps, what he's saying is you never know. You never know on a journey. Pack some extra food. Pack some clean underwear. If you're going on a hike. They sell all kinds of kits these days with your compass and your flint and your radio and your beacon and your knife and your spear. There's all kinds of stuff that, God willing, you'll never need it. But better you should have it and not need it than the opposite. Okay, now we are on page 10b. The sages taught concerning a king. When a king sins, right? We haven't finished with this idea yet. Is it somehow that he's ordered to sin? Why is it so inevitable that a king will sin? Is it merely that he's human? But about the high priest, he's human too, and it says if he will sin. Why about a king? It says when he will sin. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said, happy, ashrei, right? Same word, is the generation whose king feels the need to bring an offering for his unwitting transgression. If the king of this generation brings an offering, you must say all the more so what a commoner will do to atone for his sin, i.e. he will certainly bring an offering. And if the king brings an offering for his unwitting transgression, you must say all the more so what he will do to atone for his intentional transgression, i.e. he will certainly repent. Right? You want a king who's humble enough to say, I might have made a mistake. Let me examine my deeds. And then he figures out, oh, wow, I did. I didn't do it on purpose, but I made a mistake. And let me bring a sin offering for an unwitting transgression because it teaches a beautiful lesson about the humility of our leaders. That will be a wonderful model for all the people to examine their own deeds and to bring their own individual sin offerings when they discover that they have committed unwitting transgressions. Rava, the son of Rava, objects to this, if that is so. And the term asher is interpreted in this manner, right? Happy we are that the king is bringing, that the king sinned because he's modeling the fact that he should bring a sin offering for his unwitting transgressions, because asher and ashrei, basically the same word. Then, concerning that which is written, and he shall pay for that which he has sinned from the sacred item. Now, this more common meaning of the word asher, that, right? That something will happen. Connecting, right? That we use for connection. For that which he has sinned from the sacred item. And with regard to Yerovam, the son of Nevas, about whom it is written, Asher sinned and caused others to sin, right? Who sinned and caused others to sin? Or the man that, right? He that caused others to sin. Who sinned and caused others to sin. So too is the interpretation, is the interpretation about that, right? A king who sinned and caused others to sin, that this generation is happy? We wouldn't use Asher in that sense, in that situation at all. And the Gemara answers, here in the case of a king who brings an offering, it is different, as the verse altered its formulation. In parallel verses, the term if is utilized. For example, if the anointed priest shall sin. And in the other instances, asher is the standard formulation, right? Putting asher in this situation, if a king will sin, and writing instead when a king will sin, it's notable that it was changed to when he will sin. In other places where we use asher, it's just more obvious common syntax. Apropos the homiletic interpretation of the term asher, Rav Nachman Bar Chizda interpreted a verse homiletically. What is the meaning of that which is written? There is a vanity that is performed upon the earth, asher, that there are, asher, righteous men to whom it happens according to, asher, the action of the wicked, and there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the action of the righteous. This is Koheles 8:14, or more commonly called in English, Ecclesiastes. Happy, ashrei, are the righteous to whom it happens in this world according to the experiences of the wicked in the world to come, i.e., happy are those who suffer in this world because they got their suffering out of the way in a temporary and passing and impermanent place. This is the place to endure suffering. You don't want to be punished for your sins and endure the suffering of that punishment in the world to come, where things play out over eons, eternity. Better to suffer here. Ashrei, happy are the righteous to whom it happens in this world according to the experiences that the wicked would have it in the world to come, i.e., that the righteous suffer in this world. Woe unto the wicked to whom it happens in this world according to the experience of the righteous in the world to come. The wicked who enjoy themselves here, right, their pleasure and joy is passing, whereas the pleasure and joy of the righteous is for eternity. The Gemara relates, Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, came before Rava. And Rava said to them, have you mastered this tractate and that tractate? And they said to him, this tractate and that tractate, like, have you completed your homework, right? And they said to him, yes. And Rava said to them, have you become somewhat wealthy? And they said to him, yes, as each of us bought a parcel of land from which we earn our livelihoods. And Ra proclaimed about them, happy are the righteous to whom it happens in this world according to the goodness resulting from the actions of the wicked in this world. What does that mean? What does that mean? I think what he's saying is it's not always the case that the righteous suffer in this world and only have benefit in the next world. Sometimes the righteous benefit and have, not a whole life without problems, but they also enjoy wonderful times in this world and a livelihood that enables them to keep learning. Doesn't always happen, but thank God it happened for them. Happy are they. Rabbi Bar Chana said that Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of that which is written? For the ways of the Lord are right, and the righteous will walk in them, and transgressors will stumble in them. Hosea 14:10. It is comparable to an incident involving two people who roasted their paschal offerings. One ate it for the sake of the mitzvah, and the other one ate it with gusto, meaning for the sake of excessive eating. So with regard to that person who ate it for the sake of the mitzvah, it is written, the righteous will walk in them. With regard to that person who ate it for the sake of excessive eating, it is written, and transgressors will stumble in them. So here we're talking about kavanah, intention. They both ate the paschal lamb, right? The Pesach offering, the Passover offering. At the time the temple is standing, we would all have to eat this roasted lamb or goat on Passover night, that we as a group of people would register to have this particular goat or this particular lamb together. We're going to eat it that night. It had to be eaten roasted. It had to be eaten that night. There were other restrictions that we learned in Tractate Pesachim. And then when you eat it, you're fulfilling that mitzvah, very important commandment that we're no longer able to fulfill because the temple is not standing and we don't bring the Pesach. But what's being said here is they both did the same action. One of them is doing it for the sake of the mitzvah. The other one might not have even been aware that it's Passover. He's like, a lot of people are partying in Jerusalem tonight. They're eating good stuff. Oh, yeah, man, I will eat some of that. I'm really hungry. Yum, 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 yum. Right? So he was just eating it to slake his hunger. Or maybe, he ate enough to do the mitzvah, and then he kept eating because he was just so hungry. So the excessive eating that he was doing just to satisfy his hunger had nothing to do with the mitzvah. Are they going to have different rewards, or are they going to have the same reward? This seems to indicate the one who ate it for the proper reason, right, with the proper intention, has a greater reward or has a reward, and the other one has a lesser reward or does not have a reward. Let's keep reading. Reish Lakish said to Rabbi Bar Chana, did you call the one who ate the Pesach for the sake of excessive eating wicked? Although he did not perform the mitzvah in the ideal manner, didn't he eat the Pesach? Since he fulfilled the mitzvah, how can he be characterized as a transgressor? Rather, it is analogous to an incident involving two people. This one has his wife and his sister with him in a dark house, and that one has his wife and his sister with him in a dark house. One of them, his wife happened to come to him, and he engaged in intercourse with her. And the other one, his sister happened to come to him, and he engaged in intercourse with her. Right? So one committed the mitzvah of giving joy to his wife, and the other one committed the terrible sin of incest. Now, with regard to that one, to whom his wife happened to come, it is written, the righteous will walk in them. With regard to that one, to whom his sister happened to come to him, it is written, and transgressors will stumble in them. So what they're saying here is, it's not a great example, because what about the agency of the sister that was doing this? But let's just say that she thought she was with her husband, right? And they just made a mistake because it was an utterly dark house. Maybe twin brothers married twin sisters, something like that. So what they're saying is that somebody who is righteous, heaven will step in and help him avoid making mistakes. Now, it would be an unwitting transgression. He didn't do this on purpose. It happened by mistake. But if you are righteous in all your ways, if you're constantly striving after righteousness, you are going to be less likely to commit unwitting sins, because the righteous will, right? What's the phrase? The righteous will walk in the ways of the Lord, and the wicked or the sinners will stumble in them. So maybe the one that ended up making this mistake, yes, this was a mistake, but his behavior generally is at a much lower spiritual level. He's more of a habitual sinner, and so he's more likely to make mistakes than the ones who are constantly guarding their behavior to be righteous. Makes perfect sense. The Gemara asks, are these matters comparable? In the verse, we are speaking of one path upon which both the righteous and the wicked walk. And here in the incident mentioned by Reish Lakish, there are two paths, as the two people are not performing the same action. Rather, it is analogous to a different kind of incident. Look at this one, involving Lot and his two daughters in Genesis 19, verses 30 through 38, right? Lot watched the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. His wife turned into a pillar of salt. He and his two daughters ended up retreating into a cave in the mountains, and they didn't know that it was only Sodom and Gomorrah that had been destroyed because those cities were so wicked. They thought, or at least the daughters thought, that perhaps they were the only humans left. They were the only humans left in the world. Now, if they were the only humans left in the world, then either they're going to commit incest with their father and have babies, or it's going to be the end of the human race. So they're not lusting after dad, God forbid, but they really thought that if they don't do this, there's going to be no human race left. So this would be a sin for the sake of heaven, if indeed their intention was pure. Let us read. This is analogous to the incident involving Lot and his two daughters, with regard to the daughters who, when engaging in intercourse with their father, intended their action for the sake of a mitzvah, as they believed that the world had been destroyed and that only they remained alive. And about them it is written, the righteous will walk in them. With regard to Lot, who intended his action for the sake of a sin, it is written, and transgressors will stumble in them. In other words, they got him drunk. He had sex with them, right? What did he think he was doing? Well, he was drunk. right? But he didn't think he was saving the world. He was drunk. So he was just committing a sin, fornication. Whoever he was having sex with, it wasn't his wife, you know. And if he realized what was happening, then it was his daughter, you know. Now, did he think that I'm doing this to propagate the human race? He wasn't thinking that because he was drunk. Who got him drunk? The daughter. So there's some complexity here. Now, the Gemara challenges perhaps Lot also intended his action for the sake of a mitzvah. Rabbi Yochanan says that this entire verse, and Lot cast his eyes and beheld the entire plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, in Genesis 13:10, long before this incident, right? This is when he and Abraham parted company. That this is stated in the context of transgression. What does that mean? So Rabbi Yochanan explains, and Lot cast his eyes. This is an allusion to the verse, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, lie with me, right? So using that same phrase connotes somebody whose gaze is sexual in nature. His eyes, this is an allusion to the verse, and Samson said, get her for me as she is pleasing to my eyes, in Judges 14:3. And beheld, this is an allusion to the verse, and Shechem, son of Hamor, the prince of the land, beheld her, Dinah, Jacob's daughter, before he raped her, and he took her and lay with her. Genesis 34:2. The entire plain, Kikar, of the Jordan. This is an allusion to the verse, for on account of a prostitute, a man is brought to a loaf, a kikar of bread, in Proverbs 6:26. That is well watered, or that was well watered. Mashke, everywhere. This is an allusion to the verse, I will follow my lovers, givers of my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. Veshikuyai, in Hosea 2:7. So, what I think Rabbi Yochanan is saying is at the time that Lot parted company from Abraham, right? Abraham went and fathered Isaac and Jacob, and Isaac fathered Jacob, and they lived, this righteous, incredibly righteous life and became the patriarchs of the Jewish people and merited to receive the Torah. Their descendants did. Lot went a different way. Right? He couldn't take living the righteous life of Abraham. He went a different way. In fact, where did he go settle? Sodom and Gomorrah, right? He was living in Sodom, the place of ultimate sin that was so nasty that God had to destroy it utterly by raining, sulfur and hellfire from heaven. Why did he end up there? Because he was parting company from the righteous Abraham to go do what? Pursue what his eyes were lusting for. The Gemara asks, why is Lot accused of wrongdoing? Wasn't he the victim of circumstances beyond his control as he was drunk and asleep? Much later in the incident with his daughters. It is taught in the name of Rabbi Yosef bar Rabbi Choni. Why is it dotted over the letter Vav that is in the word Bekuma, written with regard to Lot's elder daughter in the verse, and he knew not when she lay down nor when she arose, Bekuma. In Genesis 19:33, it is to say to you that when she lay down, he did not know. He was drunk. But when she arose, later in the night or the next morning, then he knew what he had done. Therefore, his action was not completely beyond his control. And the Gemara asks, and what was he to do? What was. I mean, when she arose, it had already happened. And the Gemara answers, he should have derived from it that on the following night, he should not drink. Good point. If a guy gets drunk, doesn't know what's going on, but then in the middle of the night when he's not so drunk, he realized that his daughter gets up from his bed like he slept with her, you would think that he doesn't get drunk the next night and end up lying with his other daughter. He should have derived from it on the following night that he should not drink. Since he drank again, this indicates that he did so with intent to engage in intercourse with his other daughter. Now you could say, well, but maybe he had the same understanding of their situation that the daughters had, that they're the last human beings in the world. Apropos Lot, Rabbah taught, what is the meaning of that which is written, a brother betrayed a strong city and their contentions are like the bars of a castle in Proverbs 18:19. A brother betrayed a strong city, this is Lot, who parted from Abraham. and their contentions are like the bars of a castle, is stated because he, Lot, introduced contention between Israel and Ammon. As it is stated, an Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Who are the Ammonites and the Moabites? The descendants of Lot through his daughters. Rava taught, and some say it was Rabbi Yitzchak who taught, what is the meaning of that which is written? He that separates himself seeks his own desire and snarls against all around. He that separates himself seeks his own desire and snarls against all sound wisdom, right? Proper wisdom. Proverbs 18:1. Well, break it down. He that separates himself seeks his own desire. That's Lot, who separated from Abraham to pursue his lust. And snarls, Yitgala, against all sound wisdom. His shame was revealed, Shenitgala, in synagogues and study halls where the law concerning his offspring is taught. Right? For the rest of history, we're all remembering the sin of Lot and his daughters. Bummer to be remembered for such a terrible thing. As we learned in the Mishnah and Tractate Yevamos 76a, an Ammonite and a Moabite, the descendants of Lot, are forbidden with a permanent prohibition. Their sons, right? The Moabite and Ammonite men can never convert and become Jews. Women can. How do we know that? Ruth, right? Ruth the Moabite, who would eventually enter the congregation of Israel and become the predecessor, the ancestor of King David. New subject. And Ula says, Tamar engaged in licentiousness with Judah. So back to the idea of a sin for the sake of heaven. The daughters of Lot thought that they were performing the mitzvah of repopulating the earth. Tamar, right? Tamar, also an ancestor of King David, who was the daughter-in-law of Judah. And her husband died before they had children, and so she then married his brother, and he also died before he had children, and so then she was going to marry the third brother, but Judah's like, okay, well, this woman's bad luck. She married my son, he died. She married my other son, he died. I don't want her to marry my third son. So she's stranded, and eventually she takes matters into her own hand, puts on a costume, pretends to be a prostitute, ends up sleeping with Judah himself. He says she should be burned when she becomes pregnant, and then, but she took the sign, the pledge from him. He didn't know who he was sleeping with, but she kept the proof, right? His staff and signet, and said, well, I'm pregnant by the owner of these. And he's like, oh, she's more righteous than I. And he acknowledges that he's the father. He admits that he's wrong. That's the teshuvah of Judah, which happened between when the brothers sold Joseph into slavery and later when Judah says, I take me instead, but do not take Benjamin, right? The whole incident in the Joseph story where Judah shows that he has been transformed by his atonement, right? Well, all this is caused by Tamar, who pretended to be a prostitute and slept with her father-in-law, which was correct because her husbands had died, and Yibum had not been defined exactly yet. So the way it was practiced in those days is that she's the widow, somebody, and they could have multiple wives at that time. So she should have been taken as a wife by somebody in that family, whether it's the brother or the father of her husband, so that she would not be alone and unsupported. So Ula says Tamar engaged in licentiousness with Judah, and Zimri engaged in licentiousness with Cosby. Right? This is the incident where Bilam advises, the Midianites? You're not going to be able to defeat the Jewish people through military might, but if your daughters seduce their sons, to have sex with them and then go commit idolatry, then you can defeat the Jewish people. And that was the scheme. And it ended up causing 24,000 Jews to die in a plague. Right? We've seen that episode in the Torah. So what Ula is saying is that both of these were incidents of extramarital sex, and yet one was considered holy and eventually gave rise to King David, And the other one resulted in a plague that killed 24,000 Jews. So what's the difference? Right? Tamar engaged in licentiousness with Judah. Zimri engaged in licentiousness with Cosbi. Tamar engaged in licentiousness, and kings and prophets emerged from her. Zimri engaged in licentiousness, and tens of thousands from the Jewish people fell, right? Were killed in that plague. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, a transgression performed for the sake of heaven is greater than a mitzvah performed not for its own sake. As it is stated, blessed above all women shall be Yael, the wife of Hever the Kenite. Above women in the tent shall she be blessed. This was Yael who killed Sisera, who was an enemy of the Jewish people, who was on the run after a battle. And she said, come hide in here. And then when he was quiet and resting, she drove a stake through his head, which he richly deserved because he had killed many Jews. Why was he quiet and resting? It doesn't say that explicitly, but we understand that she had sex with him first so that his guard would be down, and then she killed him. So what's this Jewish woman doing, having sex with a non-Jewish king? Obviously a terrible sin, but she did it in order to save Jewish lives and, kill the enemy of the Jews. Therefore, it was a sin for the sake of heaven. And she was rewarded. It was acknowledged that she was a hero of the Jewish people. Blessed above women shall be Yael, the wife of Hever the Kenite, who above women in the tent shall she be blessed. That's a line in the Bible, Judges 5:24. Who are these women in the tent? They are Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, the matriarchs of the Jewish people. And apparently Yael is more blessed than they are. So apparently a mitzvah performed not for its own sake is a negative phenomena, but a sin performed for the sake of heaven is considered a positive thing. Obviously, you can, if you're saying, I'm doing this for the sake of heaven, but it's giving you pleasure, your logic and analysis might be biased. You have to be very careful when you say you're committing a sin for the sake of heaven, because it might just be your evil inclination twisting your thinking and logic. The Gemara asks, is that so? But doesn't Rav Yehuda say that Rav says a person should always engage in Torah study and the performance of mitzvahs, even if he does so not for its own sake, as through the performance of mitzvahs not for its own sake, one gains understanding and comes to perform it for its own sake. Super famous teaching in the Talmud. They're saying, okay, a sin for the sake of heaven, very high and lofty, much better than a mitzvah that is not performed for its own sake, like eating the Pesach just because you're hungry. But according to this teaching, as long as you learn Torah, as long as you're doing mitzvahs, it doesn't matter what your motivation is. Maybe you're learning Torah because you want other people to think you're a smart person. Maybe you're doing mitzvahs because you want other people to think you're a generous person who always gives to charity. And you want you're doing it just to have status, for social status. Right? Terrible motivation for either learning Torah or giving charity or doing any mitzvah. But according to this, still good. Because as long as you're learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, even if you're doing it for the wrong reason, eventually it's going to refine you and you will come to do it for the right reason. So how can you say that it's bad to do it for the wrong reason when the Talmud says it doesn't matter what your reason is as long as you're doing it because you will come to do it for the right reason? So apropos Yael, Rabbi Yochanan says that wicked man, King Sisera, performed 7 acts of intercourse with Yael at that time. As it is stated, between her legs he crouched, he fell, he lay. Between her legs he crouched, he fell. Where he crouched, there he fell dead. Judges 5:27. So each of the 7 verbs is a euphemism for intercourse. So the Gemara asks, but didn't she experience pleasure from the transgression of engaging in intercourse with Sisera? Why does the verse praise her? If she was doing it only for the sake of heaven, wouldn't it have been enough to do it once and then kill him? Why do it 7 times? Was she getting pleasure from it? If so, why would the verse praise her? Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, even the good provided by the wicked is bad for the righteous. So Yael did not experience any pleasure from her intercourse with Sisera. She was just doing what she needed to do to get this guy who maybe he was very, active. And before she could get him to sleep so she could drive that stake through his head, she had to do what she had to do. She wasn't doing it to derive pleasure. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says a person should always engage in Torah study and the performance of mitzvahs, even if he does not do so for its own sake, as through the performance of mitzvahs, not for its own sake, one gains understanding and comes to perform them for its own sake. Now, proof for this can be adduced from the incident involving Balak, right? The king who brought the prophet Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet, in order to curse the Jewish people, but ended up blessing the Jewish people. So where do we learn this about Balak? As in reward for the 42 offerings that Balak the wicked sacrificed to God, despite the fact that he did this in order to curse the Jewish people, nevertheless, he merited, and Ruth emerged from him. And this is as Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says. Ruth was the daughter of the son of Eglon, the son of Balak, king of Moab. Right? So Ruth the Moabite, who ended up converting to Judaism, right, marrying into the Jews, and then eventually, gives birth to, she marries Boaz, and what's the son's name? It's not Peretz, right? That's Tamar's son. I'm spacing on it right now, but whatever, becomes an ancestor of King David. So where did Ruth come from? Well, she seems to be a great-granddaughter or great-great-granddaughter of Balak. Balak was trying to curse the Jewish people. His motivation was entirely wicked and evil, but he did do a mitzvah of offering sacrifices not to some idol, but to Hashem. And apropos, Lot and his daughters, Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says, from where is it derived that the Holy One, blessed be He, does not withhold even the reward for euphemistic speech? In other words, if you speak in a refined manner about subjects that should not be spoken about explicitly, there's a reward for that. It is derived from here, as the elder daughter called her son Moab, an allusion to the fact that the child is from her own father, right? She had a son by her father, so Me'av, from father. It's bad enough she committed incest in order to father this child, in order to, sire this child. Why name the child after the act of incest, right? From father. And the merciful one said to Moses, be not at enmity with Moab, neither contend with them in battle. And from this it may be inferred it is in battle that one may not contend with them, but it is permitted to harass them. While concerning the offspring of the younger daughter, who called her son Ben-Ami, not Moab, son of father, but Ben-Ami, son of my people. Like, that's the right reason. She committed incest, but in order to save her people. So that's what she named the child after. Better use of speech. Son of my people, avoiding any direct mention of the baby's father. So God said to Moses, neither harass them nor contend with them at all. Even to harass them is not permitted. The Ammonites were considered, had a better relationship with the Jewish people in terms of the commandments than the Moabites, right? And why? Because of this euphemistic speech that the younger daughter used. It's a reward for her descendants. And finally, Rabbi Chia bar Avin says that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha says a person should always be first to perform a matter of a mitzvah, as in reward for one night that the elder daughter preceded the younger daughter, she merited and preceded her to royalty by 4 generations. Ruth the Moabite, ancestor of King David, descended from her son Moab, and she preceded Naamah the Ammonite, who married King Solomon by 4 generations, right? Since it was for a mitzvah that they were doing it, their intention was good. So then, since she did it one day earlier than her sister, so her descendant became, ascended to the throne of Israel 4 generations earlier than the descendant of her younger sister through the Ammonite line. That's what I've got for us today. We are at the top of page 11a. Tomorrow night we'll continue on page 11 when we get out of Shabbos. It's always a little bit earlier now every week. I think last week I got on about 9:30, maybe a little before 9:30, so aiming for 9:15 or even 9 if possible. 3 questions. Sharon, for my clarification, when we say a king or high priest sins, are we speaking of sins of improper rulings which cause others to sin by following their ruling, for example? Or are we speaking of sinning as an individual person doing a personal wrongdoing? I think in this context, we're talking about their own sin, right? And that as a high priest, he is relying on his own ruling, right? He's both a sage and a high priest. He made a ruling about what are the obligations of a high priest, and then he relied on that ruling and performed an unwitting transgression in his capacity as high priest. And so he brings that special bull offering. And the king, in this case, we're talking about his own sin that he would bring the goat for. I don't think we're talking about where a king issues a ruling and the people rely on that ruling, because it wasn't the king's job to issue halachic rulings. If he orders people to perform an action, that's not a matter of law, of halacha, right? That's just they're doing what he told them to do, and they have to follow the law. That would be, I think, if the people then, based on that, him ordering them to do it and they do it, that might be a matter beyond their control. They're not relying on a ruling of the court. They're just doing what they're told by the king. So my understanding here is that we're talking about their own actions. Bill, I admit I'd be personally amenable to a reading that we take it for granted that a king will sin. If even David and Solomon end up dropping that ball, surely everyone else is going to be at least as bad. And it doesn't seem like they ever came to the point of saying that kings should commit a sin. We haven't really got to it. Maybe the analysis will continue. I haven't read tomorrow's page yet. But a king will have a situation where, for the sake of the nation and saving the nation, he has to, break Shabbos or something. Which we know we do, right? We do violate Shabbos to save a life, and a king is going to have to make decisions about that kind of thing more often than other people are. So maybe that's what it means, not only that he inevitably will, but that when that moment comes, he must. But it's unclear whether we've actually gotten to that. It does seem like for sure there's the sense of he inevitably will. Has the Torah said that he is commanded to sin in some situations? We haven't said that yet. It just seems to be an open question at this point. And finally, Sharon, my understanding was that Yael gave Sisera salty cheese when thirsty and gave him warm milk, and that's what made him sleepy. That is what the text says on its surface, right? Pshat. Right? But it's definitely an accepted interpretation in the Gemara that really what was going on is the Bible speaking euphemistically for that action. But so who are we teaching? Are we teaching it in Hebrew school to 3rd graders, or are we talking in our shiur here? Maybe that's the difference. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, regular time, after Shabbos ends here in LA. May we all enter Shabbos hearing only good news. May we hear good news only during Shabbos. And may we come out of Shabbos hearing only good news, uplifted, rejuvenated, connected to Hashem, to each other, to our families, to our souls. And really continuing this cheshbon, this accounting, personal accounting during this month of Elul as we head toward Rosh Hashanah.